Welcome to Draw This. Draw This is a series of videos where I'll randomly generate a word and then draw it in real time so that you, the viewer, can follow along. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I'm going to randomly generate a word on wordgenerator.net, and this time I'm going to do an animal. I know I've done animals before, but I like drawing animals. And the word that we get is dog. So I'm going to have to pick a specific kind of dog. So I'm choosing this old vintage photo of a Chow Chow, and this is what we're going to learn how to draw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a canvas that is 16 by 20 inches at 150 dpi, and I'm going to sketch using the Detail Oils brush, and I'm going to use a dark gray color. I'll create a new layer for the sketch, and I'm going to set it to a multiply composite method. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just loosely sketch in this dog. So we'll have his head kind of here as a circle, and then he has kind of a broad chest, so this is another shape. Don't really worry about the position of the dog, just worry about trying to estimate the proportions of everything. There's kind of a leg that comes out from back here. And don't worry about doing the back legs yet, because there's a trick to doing that. I'm going to estimate where the shoulder is here. That'll help me place the leg a little bit better. We want the bottom leg to be level with the other leg. Just really loosely sketching here because I'm going to clean this up and make it look much better. The dog's head is kind of at an angle, so I'm using this kind of cross shape to divide the head horizontally and vertically. So this would be the eye line here, and then this would be the center of the face. There is kind of a protrusion that comes out where the nose is on the end. But it's important to sketch loosely because you don't need to be so concerned about perfect details at this point. All you're really trying to do is just plot things out and decide how you want to design this piece. Go ahead and put in the eyes, kind of about there. And we'll do it's kind of a bit of a mane on this dog here. There's the ears. I'll try to always consider this center line that I drew on the head to help me decide where to put everything else. And then the tail, of course, is very important. Wouldn't want to forget that. That is about slightly above the eye line. It's always good to compare one area to another when you're drawing to help you decide how big to make things. Gonna go kind of like this, and then the back legs are much easier if you think of this dog as standing on a three-dimensional box, or like a trapezoid, kind of like this, and that helps you place the feet better. So your other foot would go here. I mean, you know, not in every possible foot position, because obviously if the feet were bent or placed differently, you know, you'd get a different result. But this just kind of helps you if you're going for just a general standing pose. So I'm kind of putting in where the foot is here. You don't want you want these feet to be the same size, roughly. So try not to make one foot way bigger than the other. And I think that works for a rough sketch. Now I'm going to move this around and put it in a better spot and resize it, because obviously it doesn't fill the canvas in a very nice looking way. So I'm going to free transform it. I'm going to hold shift on my keyboard while I'm free transforming to make sure that I don't squash my image while I'm resizing it. And I'm going to hold shift, scale it down a little bit more, and then click to keep that change. And there we go, we have a better placed and positioned sketch. I'm going to turn down the opacity of that layer. I'm going to create a new layer underneath my sketch, and let's just call this wash. This will just be toning the canvas. Let's use one of these watercolor brushes. We'll use the noisy flow map fringe, and we'll pick kind of a yellow green. We'll try something like this that's very, very muted without the saturation very high. We'll do a little test and see if that's the color that we want, and I think that it will work. So what we're going to do is we're just going to try to coat the whole canvas evenly, and don't worry about it being too dark, because what we can do is we can go through and make it less apparent. If you're having issues with this, you can also pause the diffusion. That'll just give you a minute to kind of let it catch up. You can keep painting, but you have to let it kind of dry and do its thing. What it's going to do is it's going to let all of the paint kind of trickle into the paper texture that we've selected here, and it's kind of hard to see, but it's doing its thing, and it's going to give us a result that looks like we painted over it with watercolor paint, which is what I want. So let's turn down the opacity of that a little bit to something like this. Now we have a little bit of a wash in the background, which is good. Let's keep that wash on top of everything else. That's okay. Let's create a new layer, and let's call this dark. Let's just start filling in some areas kind of spontaneously. Let's try the square chalk and see how that looks. And let's set the composite method to multiply. Let's just work in grayscale here since we have this wash. So we'll use a dark gray, and we'll just kind of start filling in some of these dark areas. You can use a big brush if you want to put it in pretty quick. I'm looking in my image here for the darkest areas, and everything else I'm not really going to worry too much about at this point. We'll go over this with a finer brush to do all the hairs later. Still being very rough about how I draw this, because if you focus too much on details too early, your piece just isn't going to look right, and it's going to be very frustrating to work on. There's a lot of details in this piece that are just very big blocky areas, and you know, from a distance in this photo you can't see every single hair. You know the hair is there because you know it's a dog, but it isn't as finely drawn as the hairs that you see on the end of the tail. So you don't have to worry about going in here and drawing a million hairs to make this dog look realistic. People will understand that it's a dog by looking at it, as long as you give the impression of hair. Go underneath the chin, there's a shadow, kind of along the back of the leg here, a couple spots on the paws. It's kind of more fun to draw spontaneously like this too, I think, compared to really plotting it out and making it look super photorealistic. I want some of these videos to have variety to appeal to a lot of different artists, and me personally, I don't have a problem trying different things and trying different styles. That's kind of, I guess, my style, is to not have a style, and I like to experiment with a lot of different things. Let's do the tail here where it kind of curls up. There's a shadow area in there. A little bit of darkness on the back of the legs. And I think that is all of the major shadow areas. We put a little bit more there on the jaw. Now let's darken our color to a little bit closer to black, and we'll darken these areas. You want to kind of fade your dark color into your lighter color. Now some people like to work from light to dark, and some people like to work from dark to light. Some people like to start in the middle. I don't always have one way of doing it. It kind of depends on the piece and whether the piece is more dark or more light. Sometimes it's more efficient to start with one or the other if it's a piece that's really dark, then you probably want to start with the dark and then add light. Add some darker shadows to the ears. You gotta look really close because there's a lot of different values in here. It's not just all black, you know, or all gray. There's a lot of different kinds of gray. You know, the tail looks white because it's the lightest area, but it's not actually white. It's a light gray. So you have to be very careful about that when you're judging things here. This back leg is very dark. And the curl on the tail is pretty dark. And we'll do the underbelly pretty dark too. And you can feel free to use your imagination here and add details. If you want to make it darker or lighter in some spots, you can do that. You don't have to copy the painting per se. Add a little bit of dark there to kind of fix the mouth. I'll do a little bit here in between the eyebrows. Now let's add some light areas. We'll create a new layer and we will call it light. Let's use a kind of light medium gray like this, and we'll set the composite method to multiply again. And we'll just kind of go and fill in all of the medium areas. So anywhere that's not light, basically you want to fill in. So around the face is very light. Just kind of looking carefully back and forth at my photo to make sure that doing it right. It's all pretty dark in there on the underside of the mouth, but the top side is pretty light. Changing my brush size now and then. I have a keyboard shortcut that I like to use, which is hold down Control and Alt and then drag your pen, but I also have a button on my pen that I can use to do that too. Going to fill in the top area of the head with a bigger brush. And of course we got to do this ear up here. And then the legs are all pretty dark. I don't see too many light areas. It starts to get lighter towards the feet. But other than that, the leg's pretty dark. And the back leg's pretty dark as well. A little bit of light area on this front back leg, but that's okay. We're going to add some light on top, so if we do too much gray, that's okay. Stays pretty dark up in the tail here, but then when it starts to curl around, then it starts to get kind of light, so I'm not going to do much of anything there. And then let's create a new layer. I don't know why I called that light. This is actually supposed to be mid-tones. It was lighter though. We'll call this one light. So let's use not quite white, just a light gray. Maybe lighter than that. Let's try this so that it stands out. Fill that in. All around the face here. And then anywhere else you see that you need to add highlights. Side of the head, there's a spot. Near the feet, I added too much light. There's back fur here that's very light. Okay, so I think that at this point we don't really need our sketch anymore, so I'm going to hide that. We have a very rough, blocky dog here, but it will all come together when we start blending it. So let's go ahead and let's merge these bottom layers here. So I'm going to hold shift and select dark so that I get the whole range of these layers here. And I'm going to do layers, drop. And that's going to drop those layers to the canvas. And we can go ahead and blend using the coarse oily blender. You want to play around with different paper settings to get different blending effects. If you play around with these two settings here, you'll get more or less grain. So if you want a lot of grain, you want to be over here. And if you want a larger grain, you increase the paper size. We'll try something like this. Now you want to enhance the contours of the dog when you're blending. So what I mean by that is you want to do blending that follows the hair, the direction of the hair. So like down here, I'm blending with the hair, not against it, because if I do a couple undos here, you can see that if I go like horizontally or something, it doesn't make sense. It makes the fur look different. So blend with the fur and in the direction that the fur is going. I know it's hard to see in this photo, but you can use your imagination a little bit there. See how this is adding a lot of hairs already? You know, I don't have to draw each hair individually. They're being implied by the style that I'm using to draw this. And I didn't really pre-plan this. I just decided just to do it this way. So this isn't the only way to draw a dog by any means. You could use a lot of other different styles to do it. This is just how I felt like doing it today. Blending this tail out, and then blend all this up so it comes together a little bit better. You can always use the eraser if you want to clean up any extra stuff. Go back to the blender. Remembering to blend with the direction of the hair, just going that way on the face. Don't worry about blending the eyes or the face or anything, because we don't want those to look like hair. And I need to fill in a little bit more dark area down by this leg, which I will do here. So I'm going to just stay on this layer here. I'm going to work with just kind of few layers here because I don't want to do a ton for this style. So I'm going to use the square chalk again. I'm just going to put in a little dark area that I missed there. Go back to the coarse oily blender and blend that. So we have a good start. Let's add some white. We'll use the square chalk brush again. And find the very, very light areas here. A little bit along the back. To see some of these highlights, we're going to have to add some darkness to the background. So we'll go ahead and do that after we add a few more here. Now I'm just going to add a new layer for the background. That way if we're not happy with it, we can change it. Really all this needs to be is just darker. So let's pick a gray. Let's go in here with a big square chalk brush and just fill in the background. Try not to cover your dog. If you do, it's okay because you can always erase. Look at our reference here so we can see what we're doing at the same time. Could have done this first, but I wanted to keep the background pretty light while I was drawing, just to make it easier to see. Very rarely do I like to have to paint around things. I usually prefer to plan it out and do the background first, but that's okay. This is good practice in filling in things. I make my brush smaller when I come up near these edges, and then I make it bigger when I'm trying to fill in big broad areas. And I'm just good at guessing what size brush I need really quickly because I've done it so much. So with practice, you'll be able to do it pretty quick too. Use a really big brush here. Just fill that in. Okay, so now our light's going to show up a lot better when we blend. If there's anywhere that you don't like, where you filled in too much background, go ahead and just switch to the eraser and erase it a little bit if you need to get it looking right. But I think for the most part, this looks pretty good. I'm going to fill in a little more of the background by this ear. There we go. So we can go ahead and drop this layer. We'll go to layers, drop. Now it's on the canvas. We can blend again using that coarse oily blender. Blending with the direction of the hair. because you don't want it to have these sharp edges like this. It doesn't look good so sharp. You want it to look like fur. And this foot came out kind of long. I'm going to fix that. I'm going to switch to the square chalk brush, sample the background color, which is that gray, and just fill that in and blend it. Came out a little darker, but that's okay, because we need to add some dark down here anyways for a shadow. So I'm going to take a slightly darker color, and I'm going to switch back to the square chalk and just fill in kind of right underneath the dog on the back side of his legs to give some sense of shadow. Let's blend that. Doesn't really matter too much how you blend it, just as long as it blends into the other gray a little bit. Again, this is something we could have done on a layer underneath, but since we're doing so much blending, it's really just more efficient to keep things on one layer so that we don't have any issues with fringe. Now, there's some other ways to make little adjustments. Like, I notice the tail isn't really connected where it should be. It needs to be moved forward a little bit. You can do that pretty easily with a Distorto brush. So I'm going to make a pretty big brush. I'm just going to bump that tail area up so it looks a little more correct. Of course, I'll have to blend again. If I wanted to pull some areas up for the tail, I could do that. Again, they look kind of sharp, so it's not necessarily going to stay that way. This is kind of a quick way to imply the hair. And we'll do a little bit here as well. And then let's blend it using the coarse oily blender. So that it kind of matches our style here. Again, a very nice and easy way to make fur. So that's starting to come together. I think we have a lot of our rough detail in, which is good. So now we can start adding some fine detail to bring it together more. So let's create a new layer and let's call it Detail 1 for a lack of a better name. And what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in a little bit more and add the finer detail. We'll do that with the Detail Oils brush. I'm going to take a dark gray, I guess this kind of gray that I have here. Let's change the composite method to multiply so that it blends darker with the background, and then I'm going to do really quick tapered strokes that follow the contour of the tail but also kind of imply hair. So you want to follow these dark areas that are already here and go in the same direction as the hair. You don't want to just go in some random direction or it's not going to look right. So you're building up the three-dimensional contour of the tail by doing this. Just being pretty quick about it, going back and forth. Really starts to curve around and come out of this point here, so we want it to follow that. It starts to look like clumps of hair when you overlap it like this. Again, we can clean this up and make it look a little more refined. It's a very complex tail pattern here. The short hairs, don't worry so much about doing those, just kind of focus on the long ones on the ends. The short hairs get implied with the blending. It's the long ones that we have to draw. There's some longer hairs underneath here that I'll draw in. Imply a few kind of here on the mane to make that stand out a little bit better. Kind of sharpen the edge of the ears a little bit. As well as the edge of the eyebrow and the mane that's behind it. Define the mouth a little bit better. And the nose, we may have to zoom into our reference image a little bit here to see what the face looks like a little bit better. So we got the nostrils on either side. Again, remember there's this division that runs down the center of the face. So you have your nose there, very dark underneath. And then we'll divide the face a little bit here. And then the eyes are very important. They kind of have a very sharp bottom edge. There's a bit of a dark impression here above the eye. And then we'll do the other one, which I may have filled in too much, so I'm going to go back to the canvas layer and lighten some of that area. So I'm going to have to switch back to the square chalk, sample this background color. Just kind of erase some of that. I have to erase some of my detail with the eraser too, because we want a shape that looks more like that. And then let's add another layer for detail. Let's call this detail light. I do this on the fly and I always mess up my names, but it's because I'm not spending a lot of time thinking about it, I'm just doing it. So we'll go to detail light. We'll use an almost white for that. We'll use the detail oils brush. And we'll put in the light area on the eye to make the eyes read a little more like eyes. You need to do the same thing on the nose to give that a highlight wherever you see one, like under the nostrils here, and then underneath the lip. And we can start drawing in some light areas as we had done with the dark ones, wherever you see them. Underneath the eyes, there are a few light areas, I don't want to miss those. A couple little dashes here. And then let's zoom out of our image here so that we can see it better again. Lots of white on the tail. I'm going to go ahead and just use white for this. Stand out better. I'm going to also go back and do a better job of following these contours, because if I don't, it's not going to look right. Hair should have a lot of movement here. You don't want it to look like it's all going the same direction. And I think that will work for now. Let's return to the detail dark and let's add a little more dark just to kind of fill this in. Going back and forth and back, and yeah, I'm jumping around a lot, but that's just kind of how I work. Using slightly lighter pressure here to just go over it multiple times to just fill it in and make it look a little more natural. That's the thing about drawing hair. There aren't a whole lot of shortcuts. You just have to draw tons and tons of hair, unfortunately. But you can see if you're just quick about it, it ends up looking better, fortunately. Let's make our hairs a bit shorter, so my strokes are going to be less and less long as I'm going into these areas where the hair is shorter. A little bit of a dark area underneath the foot here, I believe. Again, I'm jumping around a lot, I know, but that's just how I like to work. It's hard to just focus on one area sometimes. I mean, sometimes it is better, like if you're doing a portrait, to just really pick one area and stick to it and make sure that your nose looks perfect before you jump onto something else. But in this case, I can kind of jump around a little bit. It's not going to hurt anything. Darker hairs here in this area. I'm really just kind of looking for these areas where you can see that the hair is pretty long and it kind of has a very obvious shadow. This helps build up the contour of the face and the body, and it also adds the impression of hair. Kind of a lot of different dark and light areas going on in here. Following the contour of the forehead, maybe we'll add a couple little tufts of hair to the ears so they stand out. See how this really starts to work together, and it all starts to look like fur after about 100,000 brushstrokes. It's a lot of effort, but it's worth it in the end because you get a nice piece with a lot of expression in it. People can see that you took the time to draw all of these hairs rather than do something like clone it. So if you're thinking of doing pictures of your dog or your pet, this is an alternative to just painting over a photograph. It gives you a different style. You know, there's nothing wrong with cloning, but it definitely looks like a cloned painting. And how are you going to stand out? I mean, there's so many people that do that. Where's your style going to lie? You know, you're relying so much upon this photo to tell you which colors you have to use and how you have to position your subject, and that takes a lot of the fun out of being an artist. Doing it this way, you know, picking a style, maybe not this particular style, but any style in drawing allows you to make a change. You know, I could have put this photo in and traced over it too, but I didn't. And given, you know, anybody who wants to scrutinize this can say, okay, it doesn't look exactly like the photo, it's really out of proportion, you know, whatever. I just did it in real time here, so I didn't spend a lot of time to really plan it out, and that gives it its own unique character that you can't replicate by cloning or tracing. You know, people can maybe they don't realize that they see it that way, but some people can see the flaws or the value in artwork that is less than obvious, you know. Basically what I meant there is that if it looks good, it looks good, and if it doesn't look right, it doesn't look right, and people can tell, even if they're not, you know, trained art critics or people with art history degrees. And that's who you're trying to please in the end, is the average person who's going to buy your work, not people who are just getting paid to be a critic. Or maybe people are just doing it without getting paid, but, you know, nevertheless, a lot of people with opinions out there, and they're not always positive, but can't please everyone. Just filling in this area so it's not so flat. And zooming out to see what we have here. The head needs a little more work. Just something to fill in these voids here. Okay, I think that's looking a little bit better. I see a spot on the face that I want to correct. That's part of the nose here. So let's do some layer dropping here. Let's select these two layers and let's go to layers drop. And we're going to use the pinch tool this time. I'm going to just pinch and pull in this nose area a little bit more. To just sculpt that into a better looking shape. I might do that with the mouth a little bit too. Anywhere where you need to make those adjustments, you can do that. You can use the distorto to push the head in a little bit more. I think the ear needs to be kind of going forward rather than backward on that. And then these feet need a lot of work. I've really been neglecting the feet here. I'm sorry. Let's push those into a better looking shape. Like so. And we'll zoom out and see what we have. Now, unfortunately, I know we added a lot of dark here. It's mainly a dark dog, so that's okay. But we're still gonna have to add some more light, so we'll create a new layer and call it Details Light 2. This will be another one. Use an almost white, same detail oils brush. And here and there, you don't have to go over the whole thing, but in between these dark areas where there's still kind of voids, you can go ahead and fill in some light. So wherever you see flat color, just you're trying to cover it up with lighter and darker hairs, basically, to make it look like a whole contiguous texture of fur. Again, following the dark hairs. The light hairs follow the dark hairs. They don't go against them, they go with them. So layering it up really helps. And we'll do a couple dots there. I'm going to zoom out to about the scale of the dog that's in the reference image, just to compare it a little bit better. Still think this cheek is too close. I'm going to scoot that more. That's better. I'll pull this hair down a little bit more too. Isn't it nice how you can make these adjustments pretty easily? Take that out a little bit more too. Maybe we'll pull this down. Let me just getting the body looking more like the photo. The face kind of seems a little bit big to me, so I'm going to experiment and see if this works. I'm going to use pinch, pretty big brush, and just a little tight tap in the middle there. That shrinks the face down a little bit and helps it look better. Now I think it's looking much more in proportion. So what we will do is we will go ahead and start bringing this together a little more. I'm going to really just finish these feet, because if I don't, I'm just going to neglect them and they're never going to look good. So I'm going to use the diffuse blur to blend out the underside of the shadow. Keep the top side sharp. Do the same thing over here with this one. And then I'm going to use the detail oils brush with a dark color. I'm just going to kind of try and guess what these paws look like, because I can't really see them in the photo, so I'm just going to try to remember what a dog's paw looks like roughly. These are going to be so small that they're not even really anything that you have to stress over. They can just be weird little lumps like this, as long as they're generally the right shape and color. I'm just kind of adding some little lines in between to imply the end of the foot there. I think they were most of the way there already, being the right shape. They just need a little bit more detail. All right, I can live with that for the feet. Now let's start bringing this together. So I'm going to just drop this details layer down to the canvas. So I'm going to do layers, drop, And let's create a new layer. Let's call it color. Well, let's select multiply for the composite method, and we'll keep using this color we have here. Let's try it and see how it looks. I'm going to use the digital airbrush. Needs to be more gray. There we go. I'm just filling in the dog, kind of trying to avoid the lighter areas. Again, I want this to look like kind of a vintage photograph, so, you know, obviously that the dog in real life wouldn't be green like this. I'm trying to match what I see in the photo, more or less, with a little bit of my own artistic flair to make it stand out. Oops, something happened there and I accidentally hit a keyboard shortcut I didn't mean to hit. And we can go ahead and do some on the background too. I want this to look kind of raw and organic, so I'm doing it a little sloppy. I know there's a lot of people who like to paint that way and don't like to do everything so sharp like I do it in most of my videos. I'm gonna go ahead and pick a darker gray and just kind of try to fill in these darker areas. Balance it out more. If it's too light somewhere, just add some dark, and vice versa. Especially here in the tail where it curls, there's a lot of darkness. Back legs are very dark compared to the front ones. And anywhere we go too heavy with this, we can always back it down a little bit with the layer opacity. We can also erase if you want to, or you can just add a light area over the top of everything, which is what we'll just do here. Let's pick a almost gray lighter color. Let's see what this gives us. That will work. So we'll just bring back some light in some of these areas. Makes it look a little more soft, I think, by doing it as a layer on top. Do it on the end of the nose here. That should be one of the lighter areas. Lighten it a little bit there. Go over the tail just a little bit. Okay, this is starting to come together more now. Let's drop these two layers. Go to layers, drop. And let's zoom in so that we can see this better. Let's add a new layer. Select white. We'll use the detail oils brush. Very small, thin brush. Put back in those highlights on the eyes and on the nose. We want these to be the absolute lightest areas in the piece, because those are generally the brightest. And let's add a little bit of color variation here so it doesn't look so weird. Let's call this highlights, and then we'll make a new layer for the color variation. Let's call it color. Make it a multiply, blend mode. Let's pick something that complements this color that we've been using, which has been right about here. So if we go diagonally across from it, we get kind of a purple. This. Let's try that and see what we get with the digital airbrush. In these darker areas, I'm going to throw in some purple. Since it's a complementary color, it should look kind of good. We don't need to do it this dark. Back it down a little bit with the layer opacity when I'm done putting it in. Add some to the shadow down here especially. And then let's make the background a little more interesting by creating a vignette, like so. Draws the focus in towards the center, and maybe we'll create an interesting backlight effect. Let's create another layer. Let's call it backlight. Let's sample one of these colors from the tail, one of these lighter colors. And what we're doing is we're trying not to really paint over the dog itself, but rather kind of behind it. So it looks like there's maybe a light source behind the dog. So you want it to be kind of sharp where it touches the dog, and then it gets soft as it fades out. And let's go ahead and bring this together now as a finished piece. So what we will do is we'll just go ahead and drop these bottom layers here. Layers drop. And let's blend a little bit using the coarse oily blender. Blend some of these areas here to make them look a little more organic. Looks good. And then let's add a layer for texture. This will really fill in all the gaps where there's not any hair. This will be a multiply composite method. We'll use a dark gray, and we'll use the sponge. You just want to just tap with the sponge all over the dog. It's okay if you paint off of the dog because we'll just erase that stuff. But really cover it here. And then we will blend a little bit using the diffuse blur. Blend following the contours of the dog's fur with very, very light pressure. This is going to look very subtle, like hair, very fine hairs. It's important to do very light pressure though. And anywhere where you overpainted, you can go ahead and just use your eraser to erase all that stuff that got onto the background. Or you can leave it if you think that looks cool. And we'll turn down the opacity of that so we just get a little bit of texture over everything. And I think we have an almost finished piece here. I want to play around a little bit with the color to see if we can balance this out more. So what we'll do is we will go ahead and just save our current image. And I'm going to do a save as. I'm going to do a layers drop all. So now we only have one layer. And I'm going to go to duplicate this layer. So what I have to do is I have to do a select all. And then I have to copy and paste. I have this duplicate here, and that will allow us to apply an effect to that without worrying about what's underneath. So I'm going to go to Effects and Tonal Control Equalize. What this does is this makes the whites whiter and the darks darker, improves the contrast, and I want to do that in some areas. You can play with the brightness too if you want to change that. But I'm just trying to match the photo a little bit better now as far as its overall brightness and exposure. And then the reason why we did this on its own layer is so that we can turn it down a little bit if it's too intense. Or you can also mask it if you want to by creating a layer mask. If you paint with black, you will conceal, and if you paint with white, you will reveal. So I'm just going to fill the mask with black. And it conceals it. Switch back to white, take the airbrush, and then in these lighter areas, I'm going to bring back in this lightning that we did. Anywhere where it needs to be brighter. This helps the piece pop a little bit more. Turn down the layer opacity a little bit, and I think that balanced it out. If we look at the before and the after, just gives it a little more pop. So I think with that we have a finished drawing or painting, however you want to look at it. If you enjoyed this episode of Draw This, stay tuned for more episodes every Tuesday, and take a quick second to like this video, share it on YouTube or on Facebook, and click the subscribe button so that you can see all of my new videos as they're released. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.